Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Kerry Proctor, and a warm welcome on behalf of Microchannel today's webinar. The title of the webinar today is What AX Users Need to Know When Planning for Dynamics 365 Finance and Operations. A couple of little housekeeping things to start. Please mute your phone, laptop, PC, whichever you're using. We will have a question and answer at the end, but you're always welcome to post any questions on the question chat on the screen, and we'll cover those off at the end of the seminar. When the AX user group in Australia called us a little while back and asked Microchannel to present, they asked whether or not we might show some of the functionality in Dynamics 365. But after a bit of a discussion with them, we thought what would be more interesting to their membership would be to have some of the lessons we've learned in the last 18 months of deploying Dynamics 365. We did the presentation, and that's what today's is based on. It was very well received, so we decided we'd replay this for our clients and clients we know that are using AX. So it really is an overview of what to expect with Dynamics 365, what to prepare the business for, and best practice adoption considerations. The first one. Okay, so the agenda is on the screen at the moment. We're going to have three presenters, and I'll introduce them in just a moment. But this is where we're going to go through. We're going to have Floyd give a bit of background to infrastructure assessment and getting prepared for 365. Vic is then going to run through some of the technology changes and some of the development tools, the changes that you need to be aware of. And Simon Khan will then finish off by addressing upgrade or redeploy and what other business considerations from these changes. Our speakers today have got significant experience both with AX and ERP projects, and the details are up on the screen. Now, before we start, two quick slides on Microchannel, just so you understand who we are. Microchannel has been operating over 20 years now. We're a privately owned company and close to 300 employees. This makes us big enough to have depth and also small enough to respond. Our business area geography is essentially Australia and Southeast Asia, though we do have significant experience on international projects, rolling out Australian clients overseas, from the US to Germany to the Middle East, and also from overseas projects coming into Australia and helping with localization. This slide here shows some of our capabilities, and it's worth just touching on a couple. The first is analytics, or BI and analytics, certainly a big area for many of our clients wanting specific reporting and analysis. We also have had a CRM practice, what I would have called a dynamic CRM practice, for more than a decade, and we also branched out to marketing automation to extend that further several years back. We have our back office team, which you can think of as AX or D365 Finance and Operations, and we also have a warehouse management team. And supporting all the above, we also have a technology division which looks into hosting, everything from Office 365 to single sign-on. And the reason I showed that slide there is it actually maps very well with Dynamics 365. If we have a look at the slide on the screen now, it's worthwhile being aware, if you're planning your upgrade, that finance and operations would have been what we would have called AX in the past. But PSA, or project service automation, is CRM, sales is CRM, customer service is CRM, as is field service. So there's a lot more to the application now, and certainly it's worthwhile considering, whereas you may have used projects in AX in the past, you may actually now use project service automation that's been pushed out into CRM is an alternative, as one of the differences. Supporting all this, you have your Office 365, and on the right-hand side, your business intelligence. So I've mapped those two there to show the breadth. So it was worthwhile looking at where you're taking your business and actually rethinking your strategy and vision as you move forward here. So with that, I'm now going to pass over to my colleague, Floyd Gilchrist, to run through some of the infrastructure questions.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to cover today 4 main topics as part of my agenda. The first one, we'll talk about lifecycle services, and we'll look at also performance reviews and assessment in terms of how do I upgrade or implement Dynamics 365. And then we'll also look at some environmental considerations as far as what type of environments will be required, and at what stages. And then last but not least, we'll cover off Fast Track, which is a program that's been introduced as part of Dynamics 365 for Operations. So when we're looking at lifecycle services, some people may be familiar with it as it was introduced as part of AX 2012. It was an optional component that you could actually utilize to hook into your AX environment, and you could actually also deploy Microsoft Azure cloud-based environments through lifecycle services. In Dynamics 365 for Operations, it's actually now a mandatory component, and lifecycle services follows you from the time of purchase of the Dynamics 365 product all the way through the life of using the product. So Dynamics 365 for Operations will be linked to your Microsoft tenant, and lifecycle services is ultimately the driving piece that you use from onboarding to the infrastructure and also for development related activities as well. From the technical side, it is used for ultimately determining how you're going to use the product. There's the usage profiler where you're actually filling out the requirements and filling out details around transactional volumes, number of sites, and all the important key details as far as getting the Dynamics 365 for Operations environment sized. Now, when we're looking at the sizing around Dynamics 365 in production, for Dynamics 365 Online, it is actually managed by Microsoft. Now, the difference being is the usage profiler still comes into play because Microsoft will actually utilize that as far as how they determine your footprint when you're actually deploying production. And then ultimately from that point on, it's sized and managed by Microsoft. In terms of the geographic regions, there are data centers that Microsoft have all across the globe, and determining the geographic region is also determined during this phase, and there's some assessments around performance to determine which one best fits. And then you have different environments that are part of the equation as well, which we'll talk about in the next slide. So default tenants that come with Dynamics 365 for Operations Online is the Tier 1 sandbox environment, which is used for development or build, and the Tier 2 environment for UAT. And of course, you have your production environment that comes with it as well. Now, more than the base offer is usually required for Dynamics 365 for Operations, which you'll want to take into consideration. For instance, if there's a lot of development work, Microsoft recommends that usually you have a Tier 1 environment for each developer. The other option is the golden configuration, which is pretty much you look at that as your reference environment for all your master data that you use to stage for going into production. And then you have optional environments that come into play depending on the complexity of environment, such as performance testing, which gives you an environment that's close to your production environment in terms of performance scale and gives you that true feel for what you experience before you go live. And then you can have a training environment and a number of other options around it. Performance-wise, determining the deployment location does play a role in performance for Dynamics 365 for Operations. When you're looking at deploying the region, you have to qualify each of your office locations for latency and bandwidth, ultimately because your provider, the type of connection, the usage of the service will ultimately play a role in your experience into the Dynamics 365 for Operations environment. Microsoft usually recommends that in terms of performance that you should have, in general, a latency of a lower latency as far as the connection between your desktop to the Dynamics 365 environment. And when you're looking at on-premise, you have a number of factors that come into play in terms of your servers. When you're looking at the cloud version, it's really the measurement of the browser to the Dynamics 365 environment at that Microsoft data center where it's deployed. And normally that recommendation is that it should be 150 milliseconds to 200 or better. And that gives you a pretty good response time in terms of the environment. There are tools available that you can actually test to connect to the data center and see what your performance looks like, such as PSPing. There's also a website, Azure Speed, that Microsoft recommends that you can also utilize to see the performance at each data center. And in terms of looking at other options around the environment, you have Fast Track, which Microsoft has introduced as part of Dynamics 365 for Operations. This process is where Microsoft is working closely in the project, along with us to deploy from onboarding all the way through go live a couple weeks after. There's Microsoft experts that interact both with the partner and customer throughout the process, and they provide tech talks and many other discussions around Dynamics 365 and in-depth reviews around best practice for tools and applications, and also Q&A. And I'll hand over to Vic, who will talk more around the technical elements around Dynamics 365.
Thank you, Floyd. Development. Let's start what probably has not changed. It's the development language. It's still X++, and all the investments we've done in learning that language still applies. However, the development experience has gone through a biggest overhaul compared to all the previous versions. So everything else has changed. Changes were made the way we write modifications, we store, compile, test, debug, and up the way we deploy it. So X++ code is now compiled into .NET libraries, which is much faster in execution time compared to the previous version's P code. Application itself as a metadata was when being stored as a layer file in the file system from first versions up to 2009. Then in 2012 version it moved to a database, and in Dynamics 365 it's back to the file system again, but as an XML files. Development environment was removed from the IX client, and now it's moved entirely to Visual Studio, which means in order to develop customized application, you need a Visual Studio Professional license. The X++ compiler also was removed from the object server and is part of now Visual Studio. And in fact, when you develop, you not connected anymore to OS server at all. And by removing the compiler from the object server, also kind of means that you're not able to write any now ad hoc jobs codes to execute on the environment. Like if anyone knows a table browser, there's no at the bottom anymore option to write your custom query or update the records. It has to be everything now it needs to be compiled and shipped into a production environment as a compiled code. The standard application now is also split into multiple packages, like platform ledger dimensions directory, and with every application release we see more and more packages being introduced. Either new features or existing packages are being split into multiple ones. And what changed also the way we approach into the application customization. So it's changed from traditional overlaying-based customizations to extension-based customizations. So let me explain. Traditionally, a developer would find a place where certain changes required. Then the change is copied to an upper layer. So IX would copy the existing code into your upper layer where you develop. You make a change, compiler will compile it, and instruct the object server execute that copied and changed code. This approach is still the case in Dynamics 365. The Visual Studio will record the change in an XML file. Then the compiler will compile it into a package, into a DLL, which can be shipped. And so this is a kind of approach you see on the left side of the slideshow. All the various modifications are being compiled into one big assembly, and which then is shipped to a production environment. The new approach is called the extension-based customizations, which is based on mostly subscribing to events and acting on them. For example, the extension would listen to, let's say, when a record is inserted to a particular table or being inserted, and then you can interfere, your code can interfere either with additional validations or additional tasks. This code means can be written, compiled into a separate package as a separate DLL and can be shipped independently. So why this development approach is now preferable? First, upgrades and fixes. There is no code merge required. When a new, like Microsoft releases a hotfix or new application release, you don't need to merge the code you wrote on top of it with the maybe changed code that was shipped as part of the hotfix. And if you have a lot of customizations, this code merging can be a very costly exercise. Next reason is like ISV solutions. So those can be, again, shipped as independent kind of packages that you don't really need to incorporate or make through all the, again, code merging process as you would be doing in the standard overlaying approach in 2012. And there's a very good third reason for extension-based is the Microsoft is now started to seal they shipped packages. That means you're basically not allowed to customize. There are two types of seals for now. There's a hard seal, means you cannot overlay, and soft seal, which means you still can do it, but with the next application release, it's probably going to be hard sealed, which means you need to remove your code. Otherwise, compiler would Explode compiler would not compile your code. And you can see a schedule that in next year, the application suite is the biggest package in the system. It's going to be hard sealed. So basically, all your customization needs to be done as extensions. Often in the implementations, we have some sort of integration with third-party systems. Usually, we have two flavors of integrations: is like real-time based integration and file-based integration. Both of those flavors need to be basically also redeveloped. Let's start with the real-time integrations. The 2012 had web services endpoints that you can call and insert records in real time, get response back, whether it's insert was successful or update was successful or there's an error. It was based through the SOAP-based so-called endpoints, and the Dynamics 365, basically all those endpoints were replaced with the OData endpoints. It's a standard protocol, and Dynamics is embracing it. So any integrations that were done on top of 2012 basically needs to be redeveloped to use OData endpoints. The next, the file-based integration is still supported, and on-premises implementation of Dynamics 365 is pretty much, we can still use them. But on Azure-based implementations, needs to be basically files needs to come to OS either through FTP or through using our web services. This is the reason is that Azure-based Dynamics implementations, they don't see any local network folders. They are completely locked. So yeah, two options: either use FTP protocol to exchange the files, or use some sort of middleware, which good news is that basically probably last week Microsoft released on a GitHub a recurring integration service. It's that sort of middleware that sits on in your network, scans for files, and can then send the file to Dynamics AX and vice versa. So it's a little bit our help from Microsoft in that area. Well, that's about it from me.
Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Now I'd like to just cover off it's sort of an important topic, which is if you're moving from, if you're on AX currently and you're wanting to move to Dynamics 365 for operations and finance, whether you treat that as a straight upgrade or whether you consider it as a redeploy. Now, let me just define those things for you first before we get into it. So when I'm talking upgrade, you're typically meaning that you take pretty much everything that you've got, your data, anything you may have changed in AX, and pretty much move that across and run it in Dynamics 365 as it was. There will be a few exceptions to that, but pretty much taking it as an upgrade. The other option is to start with a clean sheet and treat it as if you didn't have AX and you were implementing the product from scratch. Now, there'll obviously be a combination of variations between that, but those are the two extremes. You know, you upgrade, take everything that you've got, or you start from scratch. Now, which path you take, there are a lot of factors to consider. It will depend on a lot of your own circumstances. But here's a few points I guess a few points and key points to consider. The first thing to consider is the number of customizations. There is some significant difference here. So the bulk of the effort in moving from AX, whatever version, to Dynamics 365 is in the modifying, redesigning existing customizations that you've got so that they'll work in the Dynamics 365 environment. Okay? Now, how hard that is depends on what version of AX you're coming from. There are no direct code migration tools available for AX 2009 or any prior releases. For AX 2012, there are code migration tools which will effectively copy all your X++ code from your prior version from AX 2012 and bring that across to Dynamics 365. However, there will be manual intervention required depending on what those changes are to make that code work. One of the key areas of change is the user interface in Dynamics 365. If you've got customizations that have changed a lot of forms in AX 2012, they'll have to be redesigned potentially significantly in Dynamics 365. Also, the age of your code. If you've come from AX4 or AX3, the chances are that code that was developed then may not be optimized to run in a D365 environment, and you may have to revisit it anyway. Second key consideration is really how large and how complex is your implementation of AX. You know, are you using finance only? Are you a manufacturing company or a retail company using most of the module within AX? That'll have some bearing on how significant an exercise this is going to be. There are a few features that have been retired in Dynamics 365. One of those is Enterprise Portal, another is Role Centers. If you have heavy reliance on those things, then you're going to have to revisit how you do that in Dynamics 365. Virtual companies as well was also retired in AX 2012. Again, if you're heavily reliant on those in your current AX implementation, then you're going to have to revisit that and start afresh effectively in Dynamics 365. Data is not so much of a problem if you're moving from AX 2012. There are tools available. In both AX 2009 and AX 2012. For For AX 2009, the tools, the database has changed significantly. So the database schema between 2009 and D365 is significantly different. So the tools from 9 require you to export data, translate that data, and then import it back into Dynamics 365. So it's worth considering how much information you actually need to bring across. Now is a good time to think about perhaps cleansing that data. You know, can you start with just opening balances, open transactions, master file data? AX 2012, there are tools again, and you could theoretically upgrade your entire database. But if you've got data that's of a certain age that is not of so much use to you, now it's a good time to perhaps reconsider that. Now, having mentioned the tools, there are good Microsoft resources available, which I think you'll be able to find on Customer Source, that tell you exactly how those migration tools work and how they were intended to use. So I trying to summarize what I've just said there graphically. I guess what I'm saying is, if you're down in that bottom left-hand corner there, you know, if you're on AX 2012 R3 and you haven't been on it for very long, and your implementation is fairly vanilla, you haven't modified the system a lot, then an upgrade is possible, and you could certainly consider that. Outside of that, then a redeploy is likely to be a better option. Certainly, if you're on a release prior to 2009, then you'd be considering the redeploy option. As I say, no pain, no gain. The pain in moving from AX to Dynamics 365 really is around the redesigning the code. You know, if you have in-house developers, and I know some organisations do, then there are new technologies to learn, new concepts. You have to extend your code now. You can't overlay it anymore. There's some more restrictions around the environments. Microsoft have control of your production environment, for example. But the gains that we're seeing, this could be the last major upgrade that you need to do. Application releases now are being done on a biannual basis, and we've seen with some of our customers have been able to do 2 application releases with very little effort other than testing to the developments that they have. You know, this puts you in a position where potentially you could always be on the latest release. There's some more flexibility there. With the code now being sort of managed independently from Microsoft's code, this opens up the opportunity to use other ISV solutions that are being published on Microsoft AppSource, and other Microsoft-related products which are coming out, Talent, PSA, Field Service, etc. And that was really it from me.
Okay, we aim to run this for 30 minutes. I think we've just hit that 30-minute timing. I'd like to thank everyone that's attended. Feel free to contact or reach out to us or email any questions, and we're happy to follow up for you. So thank you very much, and have a great day.